Hey car peeps, welcome back to Jodo's Garage. This time we're going to be putting some lowering springs on the car. We're going to turn these into this and this. Let's go! Well, we got this cleaned up. Lip cut off. There was a bit of a lip on here yet from the previous metal that was there that was coming out through the sill. Trying to make that flush. Got all this area here. So now it's time to test fit the piece on there and see how that looks. Got a couple of clamps. Made a line on the metal up top here, about 1 inch from the top. That's about where the other one ended up. Not necessarily the end all be all, but it's sort of a guide of approximately where it's going to end up. Height perspective. So this is 23 3/8 close. Yeah, close. Although maybe boring, this goes to show that a lot of time goes into these little details of putting stuff in the place where it needs to be. It's not glamorous, it's not showy, but it is time consuming. Backend's got to come up just to here. Sense from the line that we scribed on there. About 23.5. So we'll leave it there for now, clamp it front and back, and then we can set the side back on, take these clamps off, clamp it front and back, and then we can get the side on and get that reel to sit at 22 inches, just like the other side. Now we need more clamps. Right here. Can't have enough clamps when you build this stuff. Look at that. Okay, so now this is in place. And we get the sight on and sort of look at it for height. So we can get it more in a permanent setup. It's got to be tucked in a little bit. A little measurement video as such. So I've got this metal plate bolted to the car. It's held in place by clamps, but even if I took those clamps off the front and back, it wouldn't go anywhere because it's bolted right there and right there somewhere. So now I've put a clamp on the side frame panel and underneath the metal plate, front and back. By squeezing that, I'm making sure that the metal plate is sitting in this peak right here. So this is kind of a diagonal and it comes right to this peak. So it sits right in that peak right there, and it sits right in the peak over there too. You know, this is cut off somewhat, but you can even feel it inside the hole here. That's where the metal plate sits. So that becomes a reproducible effect in. And I was looking at, you know, this gap here compared to the other side. And the other side didn't make a lot of sense because it seemed much higher. So I started doing measurements, and I put a block of wood on the sill here, same block of wood on the sill there, put a level across it, and as you can see, it is nice and level now. So that sits well. I put a level across on the top. A little bit hard to see, but that sits pretty well level. And so then I reproduced that on this side, and you can see, like visually, how much bigger this gap is right there. Now, one of the things I did find out is that probably because this is being cut and everything else, this is probably being held down by having the window in there, etc., and the other pieces that held it in place. So now you can see that all of a sudden that gap is pretty much the same as the gap on the other side. So that makes a lot of sense. Another measurement I took is from this, I don't even know if it's a plastic plug or what it is. The front of this plastic plug to this line right here. And for me, that was 6.5 inches. And so I measured on both sides so that I know that the side panel is sitting the same distance from here to here on both sides. So that should make it square in the end. So then I did the same thing here. I actually did the reverse as the other side, where I clamped the sill to the plate, and then I used a jack here and a jack there to jack this up to the level where this level was level. And at that point I was able to put clamps front and back. And so now I know that when I take the side panel off here, the side frame rail, if I take it off, that my metal plate is in the spot where it should be. And so I can make a couple of holes in there, put some bolts through it, so that I can have a repeatable outcome. Even if I take that metal plate off, I know where it's going to go back and it's not going to have an issue. So I would say that's a good step forward in making sure that everything stays square, and hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of input on measurements and where to measure from, etc. Okay, sight rail was removed and a metal plate welded in place. So you see I got beads going up vertical, beads going horizontal. You can see the weld marks behind from being welded in here. And then we have welds back here. And then what's left is getting welds on the underside right through here, if the light will pick that up. So the old rocker will be welded to the metal plate, and then it'll become a nice solid structure of a rocker again. And then we can set the side rail back up on it. And then if we do it on the other side and everything measures out the way we want it to, well, then it's time to actually weld that structure to that plate. And then we're starting to cook with fire. Big brakes, old springs, goodie box, new springs. So these are Roush lowering springs. Since this car is built a little bit differently, obviously everything comes together. They say that these kind of cars kind of sit high, so I wanted to get the lowering springs on it. I had contemplated doing coilovers. However, this car has the MagnaRide, so it automatically looks at what's happening on the road and changes the dampening basically as it goes. So I didn't want to lose that feature, and having these lowering springs that lowers it a little bit over an inch and a quarter or so seemed like the next best thing. After those are mounted, then the car has to be recalibrated to the new springs and basically the right height. So after removing a bunch of the wiring clips up here, down here, removing this bracket from the strut, removing the caliper and front disc, and then removing the 2 bolts that hold the strut to the spindle. Lastly, I removed the 3 nuts up top, and now we can drop this thing down. And time being, I put a driver through here just to keep things in place so this wouldn't fall out when I took the 3 top nuts off. So now it's time to remove the strut from the assembly. So I can remove this. I don't have a lot of room, so we'll just drop this down as far as we can, and the whole strut comes out. So I can't be the only one that's looking for tools about 3/4 of the time. I know I had a nice set of spring compressors, but in my recollection they were in a black box and I could never find it. Well, stands to reason because they were in a red box. So we got these on, got the safety bridge on it so they won't collapse into each other if the spring tension gets up there. So we'll just take turns and tightening them up. Now that the tension is off of it, let's see if we get lucky and this will break loose the first time. Look at that. Boom. Rubber boot off the clampies on the end there. And I can remove that. There that goes. And the entire spring comes off. Good tools, I have to battle, I tell you what. And I will slowly release the tension on this. And then we can get the new spring and put it back on here. Now we got to tighten these up a little bit at a time so that we can get enough spring tension and get the head on. That should be enough. Let's find out. Head on. There. one lowering spring installed. One more to go for the front. So off camera, I tightened the nut to 50 Newton meters on the top hat. Incidentally, the impact gun already got it there. So now I have put on the 3 nuts at the top here to hold it in place. And now I'm going to put the bottom 2 nuts into the strut so that I can get things in place. And once that's done, I can go back up here and tighten those up. So, get the bottom one in first. Top a little bit, put them in there. All right, get those through. Nuts on. Tighten these up top. Tighten these to 63 Newton meters. So conveniently, in the description that Roush gives with the install of this, they forgot to put the spec on the bolts that mount the strut to the spindle. So I did some online research. It's 184 foot-pound. So I had to get my bigger torque wrench for that. And always go back a moment. Yep. All right. So then we need to get the link, put a sway bar back on here. And that's 115 foot-pound. So preset on this. And there. Start and the sensors back, and little holes that they came out of. We got to put the caliper back on. Caliper on, of course. We got to put the disc on. So we can put this back on here because it was bit difficult to get off the disc. That'll probably mean it's not going to be that easy to get it back on. Look at that. Bolts for the caliper. Alright, started. Happens that those 2 bolts are also 115 foot-pound. So then that leaves us with the aforementioned bracket. We have to hold with a wrench. I've got this little adjustable that holds the nut. So that's a 10 mil. And then just holding this in place, hopefully that'll work. There. It actually went on easier than it came off, believe it or not. So, double checking everything. And I've got a connector here for the magnet ride, so I can control it. Plug that in. So now we got a nice red coil that matches the red Brembo, which matches the red subframe. So that's kind of nice. Of course, I was looking for that red, but it's nice they have it and it sort of matches. It all looks nice together. So that's one side done. And that's what it looks like with the new lowering spring in the rear. It's quite a process to get to that. It's not like the front where you can take the struts out and take the springs off the struts. Basically, you have to remove this line, take that line loose, take the shock top and bottom off, and then remove the cradle nut here, and there's a cradle nut here and two smaller nuts to drop this whole assembly down in order to get the old spring out and then put the new spring in and reverse everything that you just did, of course. So that's what we're going to do now for this side. One of those special sockets that you can get through the top of it, because you have to hold an Allen nut or bolt, Allen bolt on the link to the sway bar, and that's also pretty tight. So I've got a hand bend bar to get me a little bit more leverage. Okay, take the link loose. There's a bracket that holds the brake line that comes off with it. Nuts for the top of the shock, and then it's a 15 at the bottom. There, much better. Now this is the Magnaride suspension. So there's an electrical connection up top. You have to disconnect in order to loosen the shock and take it out of there. So in the description it says to take the shock completely out. That appears to be kind of a pain in the butt to get it out of the lower control arm. So on the other side I just kind of let it sit like this, and it's not really in the way, and you can work around it to get done what you need to get done. Two connector bolts in the frame. They're 13 mil. Come out. 13mm bolts there. And now I'm going to support the subframe with a jack so that I can lower that. You need to do that in order to get that spring out, otherwise there's not enough room. That's better. That's more like it. Alright, so now I can take, this is my support jack that I have under there to keep the car level, so I know exactly where that's sitting. And then now I can take the needle bolts loose. Alright, so loose enough now. Take a little bit of this. And here is the other one. And this plate here is held on by those two 13mm bolts that I removed earlier. So now this is all held up by the jack, and if I lower this slowly, I should be able to let this dangle down. Plan works. All right, so that's loose. Now you can see that there's about 2.5 finger space between the subframe and the chassis. And what I did on the other side is give myself some leverage. I left one nut on here. When you lean on that, of course when it spins around it doesn't help you much. Lean on that. You'll get the spring out. One of the things to look for if you're doing this, and this is a Roush kit, there's numbers on there. 609-435-28. And the last three digits, the 528, is different from the passenger side to the driver's side. So the 528, I put an R on it when I read that in the instructions. For right side, so the 528 is for the passenger side, and the other number, I forget what it was, 508 or something. It was different anyway. That one goes on the driver's side. So then it's a matter of reversing, obviously, what you just did. Putting this on, making sure that that is met. And then I'm gonna look where that lines up. Okay, so this has to sit like this, but this meets a stop on the lower control arm. So now we're gonna reverse this, lean on it. Getting stuck in the coils on the sway bar. Okay, and then you have to make sure that you spin it. Ensure that it's actually meeting the coil on the stopper. And then make sure that your upper rubber stopper also meets on the coil, so that's lined up properly. So that's kind of how I did that, and now it's a matter of reversing what we just did. So first things first is jack the sub-assembly back up, and that way we can get those long bolts back in. everything is back in place. And I do need to reconnect the electrical connector for the control of the Magna Ride suspension. And outside of torquing, that is everything that needed to happen. Electrical connection is back. Torqued the shock top and bottom. Torqued the sway bar link. Tighten the 2 bolts for the brake line. Torque the bolts for the subframe. Torque the 2 bolts for the subframe bracket. That sums it up. So, let's have a close-up of the result. And there it is. Again, nice and matching to the calipers. Hope you enjoyed this episode on the lowering springs on my car. Hope to see you on the next one.